Thank you, Mario. I appreciate the introduction. Um, I got to find my glasses here, or I won't be able to see much. Um, thank you. Uh, Thank you all for being here, and I want to thank Alaska Right to Life for inviting me to be here at this great conference. I flew in from Philadelphia, and I didn't believe I would ever be saying this, but I actually came to Alaska for nicer weather because Philadelphia. It's just I don't know if you've been following the news, but it's just been one of the worst winters we've had in a long time. So, but I'm glad to be here with you this afternoon, and again, much appreciated. Alaska Right to Life. This is my second time here. It's been a few years since I was here last time, but it's just a beautiful guys. I wish you didn't live so far away. It's just a lot of friends here, and it's a beautiful state. I'm here. I haven't seen. We've been in doing this now for about almost 10 years, 9 years, and although I know David and Rebecca, I don't know if I've had the pleasure of meeting Dan. I might have met Dan one time before, but I've never had the opportunity, been fortunate enough to hear any of them speak. And I was just saying I learned so much listening to them, and I'm really grateful for the opportunity. Particularly Dan, I didn't realize how much Dan and we have a lot of commonality in our presentations. And I think the one common theme that I share with Dan when we speak on this issue is that there is such a need for work in this issue, imposed death, euthanasia. There's such hyper focus on the abortion issue. I think because of this, and obviously that with abortion is terrible to say the least, and we need to fight as much as we can to stop that from happening. But I think because there's been so much attention paid to the abortion issue, we are now seeing this issue. I think happening with such frequency, it would really shock us, and that's really what I'm here to talk about today, is just this issue of euthanasia, and something we never realized getting into this battle to try and save my sister, just how prevalent it is and how much worse it's going to get. I don't want to sound all doom and gloom here tonight or today, but quite honestly, I think where we're different from the abortion issue, I think in some we're winning some battles in euthanasia, but we're losing the war. And if we don't start doing more to raise the attention or raise the awareness and start fighting against this, it's going to get much worse. And I think it's really bad already, which I'll talk about as I speak here tonight. And of course, I want to talk about my sister's case because what we learned is Terri's case was not isolated. And what happened to my sister is happening every single day in our country. And what do I mean by that? I think it's easy to confuse or to speak about Terri's case in the context of end-of-life issues. But in reality, it really was not an end-of-life situation. And the reason for that is because Terri was never dying. She did not have any type of pathological illness that was going to lead to her death. So when I'm speaking here tonight, and that's really my focus, is not so much on the assisted suicide issue, although they're intertwined. What I'm speaking about here tonight is food and water. We're not talking about food and water issues. We're not talking about someone who is close to death, imminently dying, hours or perhaps days away from death from some type of terminal disease, or even people that are being kept alive by ventilators or machines. What I'm here talking about tonight is this issue of food and water and how common and easy, relatively easy, it has become now to deny people food and water through feeding tubes because of their difficulty swallowing for whatever reason. And I'll explain why this is why we've seen this shift in our culture today, on why it's become so easy to deny people the most basic care we all need in order to live, and what we experienced with my sister's Terri's case. And tonight's talk, I think, in large part, is about why it's so important. And again, this is a lot of what Dan was saying. We are losing our rights as far as making medical decisions, not only for ourselves, but for our loved ones. And that's really what we should all be very alarmed. It should alarm us all on the power is now shifting into the hands of physicians, hospital boards, ethics committees. We talk and we hear, in fact, your governor here brought up death panels not that long ago. And when I heard that, I mean, perhaps death panels is a little inflammatory, but we have, let's not worry about the death panels that we're going to see, which I think we're starting to see now with Obamacare. But when Sarah Palin said this years ago, or a few years ago, they've already existed. They exist in the form of ethics committees. And a lot of people don't realize this, that hospitals are now in a position of making decisions regardless of what we want, regardless of the medical treatment we want, and regardless if we even have an advance directive stating explicitly what we want. And even this could be basic care, food and water. And again, in speaking these past 9 years, I don't, because the language, it's a combination, a lot of dynamics involved here, but I don't think people realize just how much our medical rights have eroded and how much it has shifted now into the medical professionals and hospitals and ethics committees. So that's really what I'm going to, and really what has happened for many, many years now, long before our family got involved with Terri's situation, but we were exposed, we saw firsthand really what no family should ever have to witness, and that's the deliberate killing of a human being by one of the worst ways I think you could ever describe, by death by dehydration and starvation, something so graphic and so barbaric. And again, I'll talk about this momentarily, a little later in the presentation, but something if I describe to you, it's just something nightmares are made of. So, but we're doing that every single day, and we've grown to accept it. As a culture, we have grown to accept it, and again, I'm going to talk about some of the reasons I believe why we've become desensitized, why every day we're becoming more and more indoctrinated into accepting this, accepting the killing of our most innocent, the cognitively disabled, the elderly, and this growing number of people that is now fallen under this umbrella of this death culture, and we have now accepted, in the name of compassion, to deliberately kill them. But I want to give a little information about Terri's situation, because there is so much, and again, I think a lot of this was deliberately, the way Terri's case was reported and continues to be reported, I think it's done deliberately. Again, and I'll probably say this more than once tonight, I already did, it's to desensitize us, it's to accept this type of behavior as something and I think I'm going to touch on why I think some of the reasons why we have become so desensitized, and I think this is a tougher issue than the abortion issue when we're out there advocating for these individuals, and I'll explain that as well. But as you see, my sister was she was born on December 3rd, and she died on March 31st, 2005. This will be the 9-year anniversary coming up this March 31st, and I don't know how much you doesn't seem to be too many young people here tonight, but Terry, depending on how much you watch, Terri's case made not only national news but international news back, as Mario said, back in 2004, 2005. Some of the things that the mainstream media continues to report about my sister, if you do a Google search on Terri's name, you'll often see that the reporter is being in a coma, is being brain dead, that she was had some type of underlying terminal disease, that she was in a persistent vegetative state. All of this is false. And again, I think it's done purposely to continue to desensitize us to the value and dignity of people that simply have a cognitive disability. And that was really what we're talking about here, that my sister had a profound brain injury. In fact, I think a lot of people, when I go out and speak, one of the things that I say is that if Terri were alive today, that she could be here with us. All she needed was a wheelchair. We could take her anywhere. It'd be a little difficult getting her here, a long trip here to Alaska, but nevertheless, if we had to, we could. We could bring her here to be with us, to join us here tonight. So, but again, the way Terri's condition was portrayed, they want us to look at her and think that she had such a poor quality of life that the humane thing to do would be just to end her life. Before I say, I always like, before I get into really, I think some of the things that how our culture has changed. I get a lot of people ask, they'll tell me, Bobby, you talked a lot about your sister's case, but you never never really talked about your sister. What was she like? A lot of people got to know my sister in the news, but it was never really the type of person she was. And I guess the best way, we grew up just outside of Philadelphia, and there was three of us. There was Terry, she was the oldest. I was in the middle. We were 13 months apart. And I had a younger sister, Suzanne. And we're a very close family. We were raised through the parochial school system, raised Catholic. And really growing up, I got to say we're pretty lucky. We didn't have really a lot of things that my dad had a good job. We were considered middle class, and not a lot of real tragedy that we ever had to experience growing up. And it was a great childhood. And Terry was very shy. Suzanne and I we played sports. We're a little more outgoing. Terry was a little overweight growing up through grammar school and into high school, so she kind of kept to herself. Didn't have a whole lot of friends. But I remember she always had this great sense of humor. Was always able to laugh at herself. And if I had to describe my sister in any way, she had this. She was just had this real passion for animals. She loved animals. We had a lot of pets. We had dogs, cats. In fact, if you walked into Terry's room at any given time, there was dozens and dozens of stuffed animals. It was like a stuffed animal zoo. But she always expressed that she wanted to grow up and be a veterinarian or work at a zoo. And I'll never forget this story. This is a true story. She had just started driving, and she came into the house, and she was crying hysterically. And we tried to calm her down to the point and said, "What's wrong?" And she told my dad. In fact, my dad was there with a good friend of ours at the time. And she said, I think I think it was a cat. It might have been a squirrel, but I'm not sure it was a cat. And she said, we lived in the neighborhood, and I think I killed a cat right around the corner with the car. So just sobbing uncontrollably. And so my dad said, "Well, wait here. We'll go out and take a look." And they left, and they came back after a pretty lengthy time. And they said, "Well, Terry, you're wrong. We looked everywhere, and we could find no cat, no signs that you hit anything." So she immediately composed herself, and she, I could tell that she was very relieved that she didn't accidentally kill a cat, which I think would have just devastated her. So after about a few minutes, she was out of the room. I said, "What?" I said, "Dad, what took you so long?" And he said, "Well, we were burying the cat." So, and that's actually a true story. But she really did just have this real passion for animals, and she was very close to her family, particularly her grandparents, and it was just really pleasant to be around. She had lost a lot of weight when she graduated high school into college, and she really blossomed into a beautiful young woman. I think you can see a picture of her behind me up there. And it's in 1984 when she met Michael Schiavo at a community college in just outside of Philadelphia. And they married, and we all, in 1986, my mom and dad relocated to Florida, St. Petersburg, and Terry and Michael followed, and then I followed the next year in 1987. So we're all in Florida by 1987. It was 1990 when I got a call. Terry and I lived in the same apartment complex, and as I said, we're very close. In fact, I had just saw her the night that I got the call from my father telling me to get over to Terry's because something had happened. She had collapsed, and I had just we had spent some time earlier in the evening, and I got there, and Michael opened the door. He was hysterical, and I remember walking over, and Terry was face down on the ground. I leaned over, and I wasn't too concerned at the time because I had just saw her, as I said, and I thought perhaps she just fainted or passed out. And I remember I leaned down and shook her shoulder, and she was unresponsive, although I heard her breathing, although it was labored. The paramedics got there almost immediately after I was there trying to get my sister to wake her up. And as soon as they went over and evaluated her, I knew something was wrong, seriously wrong, because they went into that mode and started treating her because her heart had stopped and they weren't getting a pulse. And they must have hit her with the defibrillators at least a half a dozen times to try to get her heart started, which they did. And they, I think after, it must have been a half hour, 45 minutes, able to stabilize her enough to transport her to the hospital. But she had went several minutes, unbeknownst at the time, without oxygen, which led to her profound brain injury. At first, we didn't know if Terry was going to live or die, but she did come through that, and she was hooked up to all types of machines initially. Before she was in a coma initially, but she emerged from this to the point where she was no longer in a coma. She was awake, and the only thing keeping her alive was a feeding tube. She had difficulty swallowing because of her brain injury, and she needed a feeding tube that went into her stomach. She was getting aggressive rehabilitation and therapy for the first 2 years, and she was starting to speak. She was starting to form words. So our family was very encouraged. So was Michael at the time. Very encouraged with what we were seeing with my sister improving. If you know anybody with a profound brain injury, even the slightest improvement gives families hope and really provides, not that we would ever agree or ever thought for one second that we would ever abandon my sister, but nevertheless, even any little improvement gave our family a considerable amount of hope. Unfortunately, after about 2 years in 1992, Michael and our family had a rift, and Michael, really from that point on, 1992, 93, he went on to his efforts. He went on this pursuit to end Terri's life. And without getting into all the details, if you have some questions, I'd be happy to answer them at the end. But our family fought very hard from that point on, and it wasn't until 2000 when Michael petitioned the court in 1998, petitioned the court that he was going to now take the steps to remove Terri's food and water through a feeding tube, that our family was blindsided, that we realized really what we're up against. And then it took 2 years before it did go to the courts. It was a week-long trial. And then and it was the first week, it was, I believe, the third week in January down in Florida. We had a week-long trial. And then it was February 11th, 2000, that the judge ordered that Terri's feeding tube could be removed. And then our family fought very hard for almost 5 years, a little over 5 years, actually. And we were unsuccessful. And Terri died almost over a 2-week period of going without food and water. And in the course of those 5 years, again, not knowing how much you watched of my sister's situation, but we were getting more and more support, and we were having the support of the Florida legislature. We had Governor Jeb Bush support trying to enact laws. The legislature was trying to enact law to protect my sister, which they actually did. Governor Bush was trying to help. It had moved all the way up to the Congress of the United States in 2000. I guess 2004 it started, where the President Bush eventually, the Congress passed the law. President Bush got involved. We had Vatican officials that were involved in trying to save my sister's life. We even had the 4 pro-lifers in Hollywood were trying to help my sister. That was kind of a joke, because not many pro-lifers in Hollywood. But the reason I say this is because having this type of, and again, perhaps you in here this evening, I hear all the time writing emails and letters to different officials trying to get help supporting our family and Terri's right to life. But regardless of all this, regardless of the governor of Florida, regardless of the president of the United States, regardless of Vatican officials being involved to try and help my sister, we were unable. And the culture of death was successful in ending my sister's life. And I think that's kind of an indication of where we've come as a nation, where something that we considered barbaric and inhumane not that long ago, deliberately starving and dehydrating a human being to death, to where today it's become ordinary. And again, and I totally understand what Dan was saying, because if you even try to explain to people the parallels that are occurring now in hospitals, in our healthcare facilities across the country, even if you even try to show the parallels with what's happening prior to the Holocaust, the T4 program, what was happening in the hospitals back in Germany, I mean, people look at you as a radical, that you're how can you even bring something up like that and compare it to what's happening in the hospitals today? But it absolutely is, because it's the same premise. It's the mentally and the physically inferior, the useless eaters. And hospitals are now, it's in their best interest to do what they can to end the lives of these individuals. And they have convinced us, for whatever reason, that this is something that should be accepted. And one of those shifts that's occurred is the redefinition of food and water. Food and water, which used to be considered ordinary and basic care, is now considered medical treatment, extraordinary care, artificial life support. And because of this redefining food and water this way, depending on what state you live in, it makes it rather easy to take away from somebody, even if they have expressed wishes that they want to receive food and water. Let me just hear something from you. That the culture of death saw this as a major issue, a major roadblock in their agenda of having the ability to end these people's lives, these vulnerables' lives. In a book by Wesley Smith, written in 2000, The Culture of Death, The Assault on Medical Ethics, this is what Wesley said. In 1983, Daniel Callahan noted that, quote, a denial of nutrition may become the only effective way to make certain that a large number of biologically tenacious patients actually die. So they saw this back in 1983 as a real problem. Again, the denial of nutrition for those that are biologically tenacious. I guess my sister would fall into that category. This was the only way that they can figure out that they would have to somehow address so they could allow the deliberate starvation dehydration of these individuals if we can change the definition of what it means to receive food and water. And to add to this, the AMA in 1986, in an opinion by the AMA, and again this goes back to culture of death, undermining the very foundation of medicine, paved the way to legalizing death by dehydration by listing, quote, artificially supplied nutrition and hydration, end of quote, as a form of medical treatment instead of a basic requirement for life. Then there was the Nancy Cruzan case in 1990, a watershed event which marked a major change in public policy regarding food and water defined as medical treatment. This is from, fast forward to 1988. This is from Patients' Rights Council. Many of you might have heard Rita Marker. She heads up that organization. And she wrote in Patients' Rights Council, in a 1988 case involving the denial of food and fluids for a patient who was no longer able to make medical decisions, a physician reasoned that if a patient in a convalescence care facility, even the patient's normal diet must be prescribed, therefore it is always medical treatment. Now what they're saying here is if they have to have their medical, their food, their daily food, if that had to be prescribed by a physician, then we want to classify that. Now it hasn't happened yet, but they're now talking about describing that as medical treatment. Why? For these biologically tenacious individuals that don't want to die on our terms, they have to figure a way out that they can make them die on their terms. And what better way now? See, they don't stop with the feeding tubes, reclassifying them. Now they want to bring food on a tray to individuals as prescribed medical treatment. And the next step after that is to be able to deny it to somebody based on this redefinition of medical treatment. That's why I think to this day, Terri's case is often confused and why people think that she was on all types of machines. Because if you read the newspaper accounts, they'll write that Terri was taken off life support, that she was hooked up to artificial life support. Well, technically, I guess you could say that's correct because they have redefined what it means to receive food and water through feeding tubes as artificial life support. But people, our society doesn't understand that this shift has been made. So when you hear artificial life support, right away it goes, and we think that this person must be on machines, which in fact it is not true. So when they write these reports, they would seldom say artificial life support and somehow, which means food and water through a feeding tube. But you would rarely read that in these newspaper accounts. The PVS diagnosis, and again, this goes back to, and again, what Dan was saying, how can we shift, and I'm just going over a few of the dynamics that are occurring in our culture today, but again, I think this was a diagnosis that was created in the early 70s, and from this, we were able to subjectively diagnose somebody as being in a condition that allows us to kill them. Because if a person, again, state law dictates, I know it does in Florida, if a person is considered to be in a persistent vegetative state, then law dictates that we can end that person's life if the guardian chooses to. The problem is the PVS diagnosis, it's figuratively and literally extremely dangerous. Figuratively because it's, well, let me go back. First say that the diagnosis is completely subjective. It's under the discretion of the doctor. And again, it's an absence of awareness. It's not being able to interact with your environment, okay? And I'm going to show you a video in just a moment of my sister, not quite yet, Thomas, but in a second, of my sister not even coming close to meeting this criteria. But yet the judge, and based on doctor's testimony that came in and testified on behalf of Michael Schiavo, the judge agreed with the testimony, even though the video was completely contrary to the PVS diagnosis. But it's also dangerous in the sense that when you refer to somebody, and what has morphed from persistent vegetative state, is calling someone a vegetable. And again, it goes into dehumanizing individuals, where they're no longer alive human beings, which they are, they've now become vegetables. Again, it's verbal engineering. It's a way of dehumanizing these people to accept this as being a compassionate thing to do to an individual. But how it's become literally a death sentence is what I just told you, is they use it as a criteria in law to end a person's life. But figuratively, it also becomes a death sentence, because once a doctor diagnoses somebody as being in a PVS, their insurance will cut that person off for any type of future rehabilitation therapy. And the biggest thing that these individuals need with these brain injuries is rehabilitation therapy. But as soon as they're diagnosed as in BVS, the insurance, whatever insurance they have, and I believe it would be for Medicaid and Medicare as well, they're basically cut off. And what happens? The family doesn't have the resources to able to afford what they need, rehabilitation therapy, and they're abandoned in warehouse and basically given up on. And the family is in despair and suffering because they're no longer in a position to provide what these individuals need. And as a society, again, we have grown to accept this. But I want to show you now, don't start it yet, Thomas, but you can bring it up. This is in 2002. And again, remember the definition of PVS. And this is what the judge saw. The definition of PVS is having no awareness, is unable to respond or interact with your environment, and unable to follow commands. This was in 2002. This was submitted to the judge for proof. And the voice that you hear is a neurologist, and you'll understand once you watch it. It's less than a minute long.
Terri? Open your eyes up. Open your eyes. Terri, open your eyes. Terri, good. Good job. Good job, lady. Good job.
It took Terri a couple seconds for her to process the command. That's why there was a hesitation when the doctor was saying, open your eyes, before she actually listened to him. But the doctors, when she responded this way, the doctor felt it was remarkable, given the fact that from 1992, and this was in 2002, for the better part of 10 years, Terri was warehoused and abandoned by Michael Schiavo, her guardian and husband, and she was denied all rehabilitation therapy, even range of motion. So the fact that, and if you know anybody, again, that has these types of catastrophic brain injuries, if they're not constantly given range of motion, stimulation, rehabilitation therapy, they're going to deteriorate. So the fact that Terri was able to respond like this was quite remarkable and disproved this notion that she was in a PVS condition. I don't, thank you, Dan. I don't have to get into the whole personhood theory, but I too talk about Peter Singer and the bioethics movement and what's occurring in our country today and how they are having such an impact on our future doctors and nurses. In fact, I go back to Wesley Smith's Culture of Death book that he wrote many years ago, sounding the alarm of the medical ethics, of the onslaught, if you will, of the modern-day bioethics movement. And I speak in general terms. Obviously, when I speak of doctors, attorneys, the bioethicists, they're not all, lack of a better way of saying it, they're not all bad. In fact, Wesley Smith is one of the good ones. But we're seeing more and more of them accept this premise that certain people are human non-persons, and therefore it should become up to us whether or not they should live. And we should have the decision whether or not they should live or die based on someone's quality of life. Back, I bring up Wesley again, and again, just to show you, this is Professor Bill Allen. And where is he a bioethicist at? He's a bioethicist at the University of Florida. And they had a debate on, I believe it was national TV, and Wesley just cuts to the chase and said, Bill, they were debating Terri's situation. He said, do you believe Terri is a person? And you see his answer, no, I do not. And you don't think that these professors are having an impact on our doctors and our nurses and our healthcare professionals of the future? It's happening right now. This has been going on for many, many years, long before, in fact, Michael Schiavo's attorney, George Philo, said back when Terri's case was starting to make the national news that it did, he said, I don't understand why this case is making so much attention. He said there has been tens of thousands of people like Terri that have already been killed this way, meaning the removal of food and hydration. So this is something that was happening long before Terri's case started and continues to happen every single day in our culture. And these are some of the dynamics why I think we become more and more, or less and less compassionate when and I think it's something more which I'll get into in a moment. But I just put up, and again, I don't need to go over this again, but these are just some pictures of people that are in our culture today are now considered human non-persons. And I have Ronald Reagan up there. Does anybody know why? He had Alzheimer's. And under these bioethicist personhood theories, someone with Alzheimer's is considered a non-person. So therefore, it should be up to us whether or not they live or die. In fact, it's happening every day where people with Alzheimer's are being systematically killed. Again, the media, and I think if probably, if anything tonight, and there's the dynamics and why our culture has shifted, why we are accepting this more and more. I mean, as I said, there's a lot of dynamics. I'm just picking out a few here tonight, but I think the media has a tremendous impact on our culture today. And again, I'll tell you, and I'll give you some evidence of that. But anybody know Nat Hentoff? He's one of the good guys in the media with the pro-life. He's actually a Jewish atheist, but he's into disability rights. He's into the protection of people like Terri with these disabilities. And this was back in 2003 when he wrote this article. He said the title was "Lying About Terri Schiavo," and he said to his colleagues, I mean, he'd been in the business for what, 40, 50 years, and he's one of the most respected journalists out there. And he said when it came to describing or writing about Terri's case, it was one of the worst cases of journalistic malpractice that he's seen. And he had covered the Karen Ann Quinlan case and the Nancy Cruzan case, two big cases that made a lot of attention. So we saw back in 2003 the impact that the press was having on covering Terri's case. This is a DJ. Now, the only reason I put this up there, because there's message boards out there that just write about Terri in the most horrible ways. But the reason I put this guy up there, and appropriately his name is Bubba the Love Sponge, he's on Sirius Internet Radio, and he's got millions. He's one of them. He's up there with like a Howard Stern, who's very popular, and this guy is very popular. He's got 4 radio stations, and also he's on this internet radio. And whenever he talks about Terri, and I don't know how much he does anymore, I'm sure he does. This was in 2010. This is how he describes her. This is how he describes my sister. And I hate to even put up there because it is so offensive. But you don't think that has an impact, people listening, on people with these types of profound brain injuries and the prejudices that are not only we have, but are growing towards people like my sister? Just in 1 second, Thomas. This was in 2010, so this wasn't that long ago. This was 5 years after Terri's death. We've all heard of The Family Guy. And you all heard of The Family Guy? It's one of the most popular shows on TV. And this caters, the demographics of this are high school kids and college kids. Well, we came across something that we didn't know was occurring. It occurred at the time. We got a link saying that the night before that The Family Guy did a skit on my sister. And it was the opening of the show. And I'd like you just to watch this for it's just less than 2 minutes if you take a moment to watch this.
I am so excited for Stewie's first play.
Don't you think it's a little soon for a musical about Terri Schiavo?
Or too late?
Shh, it's starting.
Schiavo. How's my wife doing?
She's a vegetable.
I hate vegetables.
Don't worry about her, Mr. Schiavo. She's being kept alive by medical science.
Gee, look at all this stuff. How does it all work?
Well, I'll tell you.
This one keeps her liver clean. This one checks her pee.
How about this one over here?
Oh, that's just the TV. Ha ha ha! This one checks her heart rate. This This one checks her veins. And this suspense is gravy for her mashed potato brains.
Oh, 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 Terri Schiavo is kind of a lipo. What a lively little bugger.
Maybe we should just unplug her.
Terri Schiavo is kind of a lipo. The most expensive plant you'll ever see.
There's only one solution. It's in the Constitution. We've got to pull the plug.
I mean, they didn't even get my sister's situation correctly. I mean, she wasn't hooked up to all those type of machines as they portrayed, but that's beside the point. I mean, this is terribly offensive. And you know what the default is of these people? Oh, come on. You need to learn to laugh at this stuff. It's just a joke. But unfortunately, my mom got to see that. And that's not a joke to her, nor is it to me, nor is it to the people that are caring for these individuals that have these types of brain injuries. And the prejudices that exist and they're continuing to grow towards these individuals. And something like this. Well, that could be true, Mr. Bird. But you know, it brings up a point too. That I mean, who do we point the finger at here? Do we point the finger at Seth McPherson, I believe is the producer of this, and that DJ? Do we point the finger at him, or do we point the finger at us? Meaning, if we didn't watch or support these shows, or listen to him, or watch that TV program, then they wouldn't be on. But obviously, we support these. The advertisers come out and support them with millions of dollars. So this continues. So until it really is a reflection upon us that we support this type of garbage. And it really brings me to really going back to the abortion issue and this issue, because I think we have a much tougher issue to get the support of like we have been with the gains that we've been making or the progress we've been making in the abortion issue. And I think again it's this underlying this prejudice or that exists against people with disabilities, profound disabilities. Because what I think happens here, you look at a baby and we say to ourselves, yes, we need to fight as hard as we can to preserve the life of that unborn child and fight for that baby so it has a life. But then we look at someone like my sister in her broken state. And although we might say to ourselves as pro-lifers, yes, she has value and dignity, but who would want to live that way? And I think this question is driving a lot of our fears and driving a lot of the way in which we choose to support this issue. But the wrong question is being asked. Because nobody would choose to live this way if given the choice. Nobody would choose to live with a disability. But something we all have to understand is that there are people living this way. Tens of thousands, if not now more. In fact, the New York Times, of all papers, recently did a story on people in these types of conditions. And they estimate upwards of 200,000 people are in similar conditions to my sister with these types of catastrophic brain injuries. So, again, the question really falls upon us. Not who would want to live this way. What are we going to do to protect these individuals? I think we also see it, the prejudice that exists. And again, I go back to the New York Times. They did a story where they found that 90% of families are aborting babies that are diagnosed as having some type of disability or Down syndrome before they're born. Well, if we're seeing that's such a high rate percentage of families that are not even wanting to care for their disability, their child with a disability, and aborting that child, you don't think that prejudice exists to those that are already born with these disabilities? Again, I think it gives us it speaks to, I think, how we look at these individuals, and perhaps we're dealing with our own fears in wanting to care for these people or wanting to support people with these types of so-called quality of life. I mean, this isn't easy, this is a difficult issue. I mean, dedicating your life to having to care for someone with these types of disabilities, it's a very difficult, particularly in the beginning when the family is faced with knowing that perhaps their loved one is not going to improve. Their quality of life is going to be as such where they're going to need constant care and love. But I think after the family accepts that, as our family did and others' families do, they come to the understanding that God put this person in their life, and it's a way for them to express their love and their compassion in a way that we can't do with an able-bodied person. And we talk to families all the time, and they consider themselves blessed that they are caring for individuals that have these types of disabilities and able to express their love and compassion to someone that is completely vulnerable. March 18th, 2005 is when my sister's feeding tube was removed. And again, we can't do this to an animal or those on death row. We would, it's a felony crime. I know at least in Florida we would go to jail. But yet we're doing it to our most innocent, vulnerable people in our country and really globally today. And again, I put these pictures up here, and something Dan touched on. But people would ask me, what was it like walking into your room and seeing your sister? What did she look like? The media was just so interested in wanting to know what Terri looked like. And the only thing I could think of are the pictures of Auschwitz. And I got to tell you, seeing my sister those last couple days, these pictures do not do justice on how much my sister physically deteriorated and how terrible it ravaged her body. And I can get into some pretty graphic details of how she physically deteriorated. We told my mom, I think it was 3 or 4 days before Terri died, we would no longer let her visit her because of how much physically grotesque she looked from the effects of dehydration and starvation. My father, who died, passed away in 2009, told me privately one time that, and my dad became very depressed, as you can imagine. I'm not a father, so I've never had my own child. My dad told me one time, he said, you'll never understand what it is to love something until you have your own child. And he told me, not long after Terri's death, that he was never able to forgive himself for not being able to do more to protect his daughter. And my dad died with that on his heart, and literally died of heart failure. And something, I don't know if it was more difficult for me walking into a room for almost 2 weeks and watching my sister die this way, or walking into a room and watching my parents watch their daughter die this way without anything they could do to stop it. I don't know if you can read that, but George Philos, Michael's Schiavo's attorney, came out and did a press conference just a couple days before Terri's death and said this to a nation that was watching. And this is the narrative that you'll hear from people that support this issue, that this is a painless and peaceful way to die. And again, this is the furthest thing from the truth. But it's the lie they have to tell. It's the same lie that they tell about abortion and the unborn child. They come up with ways that they want us to accept this because they don't want us to know the reality of the situation and really what was happening in the confines of that room. In fact, Father Pavone came out not too long after this and gave his own press conference. Father Pavone was able to go in there and witness what was happening and tell everybody that this was just a lie. We are now in the position of we help families. And this is just one example of the countless cases that we get called. We get calls now from our foundation. And as you can see, this was of a woman. This was the niece had called us because the sister of this woman was guardian. And if you read that, you can see that she had a minor stroke, and she had good vitals. And if you see the next line, it says she's awake and conscious and being starved and dehydrated to death, and she eventually died this way. There was nothing they can do because the guardian decided to take away her food and water, which is medical treatment, and she had every right to do so. The woman was not in a condition where she could make choices on her own, and this is the result. As I said, Terri, as a result of what happened to my sister's situation, our family wanted to continue to try and advocate for these families because we saw really what was happening on a day-to-day basis, being completely naive when we started this battle to save my sister's life. We have 3 basic goals: to raise awareness, educate the public, and help families that call us for help. One of the families that recently called us through the attorney was the Jahai McMath family. And some of you might have heard of the Jahai McMath. We became so hyper-focused. And again, it goes back to what I said in the beginning. The press made this about brain death and that the family was being unreasonable. This is not, we are so hyper-focused on this brain death diagnosis, which itself has its own problems. And when you tie that into the organ donation program, and again, It goes back to the creation, this medical community, creating a diagnosis, this brain death diagnosis, because did you know that you cannot harvest organs from a dead person? You can only harvest organs from a person that's alive. So they had to create some way of getting at organs while the person's alive, hence the brain death diagnosis. Because the person is technically, from my understanding, is not, although they have the brain death diagnosis, they're still alive. But we're really missing the point in the Jahia McMath case. We came out, and so the family reached out to us, which always has to happen. We don't impose ourselves on situations unless the family reaches out to us. And they did through the attorney in this case. And this is about, again, parental rights. Who is going to make decisions for loved ones in these types of situations? Is it going to be hospitals, hospital boards, ethics committees, or is it going to be us? Is it going to be our family? And this hospital, after they put Jahia in the condition in the first place through a procedure that went awry, now they were declaring her brain dead. And the family, who I've been able to visit on 3 or 4 occasions, told me that the organ donation team, or the people behind our organ donations, were there within a day of them declaring Jahia brain death. Well, they wanted time, and they should be afforded that time to see if they saw signs in their daughter that they believed provided them hope. And they should be afforded this time if they want it. And unfortunately, they were able to get it through fighting the hospital and having her transferred. And as I said, I was able to visit Jahia and the family on a few occasions, and she is, to this day, she is physically doing well and showing signs of improvement. Now, where this will go, we don't know. But she at the moment, she is doing very, she at least physically is doing well. Neurologically, she needs help. But again, we have to understand what this is about. It's about who is in the position to make medical determinations for loved ones. This is Brendan Flynn. He was involved in a catastrophic car accident, a fatal car accident, I'm sorry, where his friend was killed. Brendan, long story short, Brendan was air vac to a hospital. The doctor said he was going to make no significant improvement, no significant quality of life. They recommended to the mom that he put him in a room and let him die. The mom said, no, I want you to treat my son. In this case, the hospital acquiesced it, and they did treat Brendan by the parents' orders. And today, Brendan has a daughter and a beautiful young child, and he actually goes out and public speaks now about what almost happened to him. Again, it goes how much the pressure that's occurring on families now. You want to trust doctors. You want to believe in what they tell you. But how many times, whatever motivating the hospital, and sometimes I think it's financial reasons, it's the organ donation program, that they're making these decisions awfully quick without giving loved ones a chance to see if they can improve. How many families out there have given up on their loved ones because of the pressure of physicians before giving them a chance to see, in fact, they can improve? Our family, we're always looking for attorneys and doctors to join our resources in case families calls us that need help if they're ever faced with these situations where ethics committees, hospital boards are putting pressure on them to give up in the lives of the loved ones. I can give other examples of families that we've had experiences with where chilling stories of what's happening out there. And again, there are some wonderful facilities out there. There's some wonderful doctors. But I think we're seeing more and more this gradual acceptance of this making life or death decisions based on somebody's quality of life. And I know this has been between Dan and myself. It's been kind of a depressing topic here this evening. But and I can't really, perhaps I should save more time, but there's been a tremendous amount of blessings that have resulted from my sister's case. One thing I forgot to say, the Catholic Church, incidentally, does not accept food and water through feeding tubes as medical treatment. The Catholic Church still recognizes that as basic and ordinary care. So if a person is not dying and they're only being sustained by food and water, and they can metabolize or assimilate it, then we are morally obligated to care for that person. In fact, we're not even allowed to give instructions to remove food and water from ourselves because it would be considered self-suicide, because food and water by the Catholic Church is still recognized as basic and ordinary care. But please understand the blessings that have come because of the result of my sister's death. I mean, the friends that we've made, the relationships that we've established from so many people, the friends that we've made, and just so many blessings that have come, and really the people that we've been able to help only because of what happened to my sister. And not to get into my journey, but I was a fallen away Catholic. I was on the path of eternal damnation, believe me. And it was only because of my sister's case and my sister's situation, and I think my sister praying for me, that I had a reversion back to the Catholic Church. And it's funny, it occurred to me not that long ago. I talk about all this effort to save my sister's life by so many people and my family, and I realized one day that my sister may have saved my life. So if that's why we went through all this, then perhaps God had a different plan. But again, I want to thank you for taking the time to be here. It's just very important material. I know David's kind of given a little better hope and some things that we can do to get involved. And that's why I asked you tonight. We have to build a culture of hope. And we have to start becoming involved in this issue. Because, again, this is something I think is going to get much worse before it gets better, if it does get better, if we don't start paying attention, really what's happening to people like Terri, cognitive disability, the elderly, and so many other people that are medically vulnerable. I just want to end tonight. I know, I think I'm okay. Am I okay on time, Chris? I just want to show, am I okay, or should we end it here? I was just going to show a quick video. It's about 5 minutes. Is that all right? And then we can end there if that's okay. But go ahead, Thomas. And take.
Should Terri Schiavo live or die?
This has become a battle extraordinaire.
That a guardian would be allowed to starve a person to death, allow her to die by dehydration.
It has torn a family apart, even as we speak.
And we want to do what we can to try and protect those from what happened to Terri and be a voice for the disability community so something like this won't happen to other families. As a result of what happened to my sister, as a result of the 5-year battle, as a result of the tremendous suffering that she went through, what happened to Terri is not isolated, and that's probably the most important thing. People that have these types of cognitive disabilities, like Terri, that are only being sustained by food and water, no machines, people that are not dying, situations that are not end-of-life situations, are being killed every day, not only in our country, but globally.
I remember the day, I will never forget, August 17th, 1997. Our daughter Corinne had a sudden cardiac arrest. So I remember vividly Terri Schiavo and her family situation.
Corinne was asking us, just days before her incident, what was the Lord's plan for her life? What was the Lord asking of her? And then, just days later, she has this cardiac arrest incident, and her life totally changed, and so did ours.
What I remember most vividly was seeing the videos of Terri. I remember her interacting with her mother, her laughing at her father's jokes. She was able to follow, I believe it was a balloon. She was able to track that with her eyes. I remember that the Schindlers, her family, were fighting for her life for so many years before I even became aware of this in 2005. And it was just so heartbreaking to watch this and to know what was going on.
In May of 2002, Brendan Flynn of Seneca Falls, New York, had just graduated from high school when he and a friend were involved in a fatal car accident. The friend didn't survive, and Brendan was left in a coma for 3 months. The prognosis was poor, but his parents refused to give up, and Brendan survived. When he finally woke up, he had no speech and limited motor skills, but Brendan's family was determined to keep seeking help. rehabilitation was key to his progress.
I had a job after my accident. I worked at Staples for a while in Geneva, New York, and I came across a customer, and I got talking to him. This was when the whole Terri thing was going on in 2005, I think it was. And I was really disgusted with it, and I would just talk to customers about it, and I would tell them my frustrations, and it'd be kind of therapy for me. And so I told this one guy, and I told him my story, and I told him everything that happened to me and how what they're doing to this girl was wrong, because I wanted them to stop it, and I would have done anything in my power to stop it.
The dream, the facility that we're going to have a rehabilitation center in our area is just so exceptional for people who might otherwise feel vulnerable and not have the opportunity for the rehabilitation, the therapies that Bobby's facility would really make available for families and help families come together.
This reporter named John Cypress out of Tampa, Florida, and he would connect me with him. So I got connected with him, and he interviewed me and my mom on the radio a while back, like '06, and so from talking to John, I got connected with Bobby Schindler, and then I looked into it, and I looked about everything that Terri Schiavo Life and Hope Network does for people. It's incredible.
Something else has always been a dream of our family, in particular my father, is to establish a neurological center for people that have catastrophic brain injuries. Within the last year, we have now taken the steps to establish an outpatient rehab center, a state-of-the-art outpatient rehab center here in the Philadelphia area. Food and water through feeding tubes is being denied every single day, and we established the Terri Schiavo Life and Hope Network to fight against what is happening in our culture, and to fight against and to help families protect loved ones that are in jeopardy of being killed the same way that Terri was being killed, by having her food and water denied to her so that she would starve and dehydrate to death.
I mean, after the hospital, even when I was alone, I never could have dreamed I would have a beautiful daughter, a beautiful wife, beautiful family. I have a beautiful life. I love being alive.
I want to thank Bobby for coming up here and sharing with us his story and his sister's story and what he's been learning since then. I want to open it up for some questions. We have a few more minutes left. But just as a note for us in Alaska, in 2004, the Alaska legislature passed a bill, I think unknowingly, that gave a doctor the power to put a do not resuscitate order on a patient without their consent or the consent of their family. And that order cannot be removed without the doctor's willingness to do so. The patient has no control over that. And we had a situation a couple of years ago, a woman by the name of Marjorie Mullen's husband had I think it was terminal cancer, I think it was. And of course he lived like 3 years past he was supposed to be dead, but because he kept recovering and then going back to the hospital and recovering, and he was back in the hospital, and this was Providence, our Catholic hospital, and he eventually died, but he died from pneumonia because he was not getting proper care, because they didn't think he was worth it. Essentially, I mean, I'm paraphrasing, it could be a really long story, I'm not going to get into it, and Margie could get into it. But that's one of our legislative goals, is fixing that bill. But it's beyond legislation. It's a cultural problem. It's a problem of us valuing and how we value human life, is what Dan was talking about. We need to value human life because we're created in the image of God. So I don't want to take up any more of Bobby's time. Questions? Sorry, Rebecca, locals first.
So how does a person who has actually expressed their wishes explicitly that he or she wants food or water, even if administered, so-called artificially, in an assisted fashion, how does a person like that, who has made their wishes known, deal with the fact that these medical ethics boards in the hospitals, are turning around and denying these people food? How do you circumvent those boards?
It depends. First of all, it depends what state you live in. I know Texas. In fact, your old organization did a in-depth study on that, National Right to Life, and you can go on our website or your website. I'd link it to your website, to their website, to talk about the state laws and how each state law pertains to food and water issues. And I think all but 12 states now, if I remember correctly, they have the power now to deny food and hydration or medical treatment by ethics committees. So again, it depends. I don't know what the law here in Alaska is when it comes to food and hydration, but how do you protect yourself? Well, I mean, it's now. It would be up to yourselves really to sit down, probably someone with an attorney, pro-life attorney that really understands the law and the language. For me, our attorney said, don't even fill out an advance directive. The best thing to do is appoint healthcare proxies that would speak for you if you ever became incapacitated. And they recommended an odd number in case there was a dispute, but make sure that they adhere to your values and principles, obviously, in your faith. But again, it's up to you. It's always good to sit down with an attorney and go over these things and understand your state laws and understand the language and what is the best way to protect ourselves. The questions we need to ask our loved ones when we do go to a hospital and facing doctors. There's a lot of things that your families can do to protect you, at least delay any decisions they're trying to make to end someone's life. So it's really a case-by-case situation. But healthcare proxies, I think, is a definite must. Someone that you would appoint to speak with you. You give them the power of attorneys. You make them power of your healthcare proxy, healthcare determinations. Yes, Mr. Bird. Yes. The question was, what were Michael Schiavo, the guardian's motives, incentives to end my sister's life? And it's hard to know a man's heart. There was a considerable amount of money, close to $1 million at the time that he was a guardian. And a guardian has an exceedingly amount of power over an individual. Whoever the guardian is of a loved one, I mean, and in Michael's case, he really turned out to use it as a weapon against our family. He became guardian unbeknownst to my mom and dad, but he had enormous conflicts of interest. In fact, we thought there was no way a judge would ever entertain his petition to remove my sister's food and water. I mean, he had the money that he was going to inherit if Terri died. He was living with another woman who he had fathered 2 children with. He said that he was his fiancée. He had asked her to marry her while still being married to my sister. And Terri's so-called wishes, and that was the basis of Michael removing the feeding tube. He said that Terri didn't have an advance directive. He said almost 10 years after Terri's collapse in 1990, that Terri had made express wishes, verbal wishes, before her collapse, if she ever became incapacitated, she wouldn't want to live this way. It was all hearsay evidence. The judge accepted it. All these conflicts of interest, said he believed Michael and didn't believe my family, and therefore the battle ensued. So yes, it's interesting. Mostly when I speak to kids, I speak to a lot of high schools and colleges, and usually one of the first questions I get is, can you, and I speak mostly in Catholic, I don't think the public schools want me to speak. I haven't spoken to too many public institutions, but one of the first questions is, have you forgiven Michael, or how do you feel about Michael now? And I think forgiveness, not to get into, but I think for me anyway, forgiveness has been, it's been, I pray for God's grace to find that forgiveness. And there's some days that I do. I pray a lot about it, and I do. I feel like I find forgiveness in my heart for Michael. And There's other days I'm very angry, particularly when I think about my father and mother and how much they suffered at his hands. But then I tell the kids, I say, look, I think the most powerful thing we can do, or what we can do, is we need to pray for Michael. Because can you imagine if he's had a conversion, and he was up here speaking to you tonight, or today. His witness, I think, would be much more powerful. He's up here telling you he was wrong than it would be from my witness. So I think we have to pray for that, and hopefully, with God, He can do anything, and perhaps that someday that will happen. So, yes, Rebecca.
When my grandma had a stroke and she wasn't swallowing, my dad and my aunt had made the decision to follow the advice of the hospice doctor and to remove hydration and nutrition. Mm-hmm. And I explained to my dad that, feeding tubes are not extraordinary. Right. My daughter, we had a baby girl who died at 33 days old. There was some medical malpractice involved that, she was going to live. But every day that she was alive, it was because of tube feeding. Right. That I gavage fed her through the throat. And I saw with everything that the doctor had told my parents. She gave an article that she had written, like some sort of op-ed or something for a newspaper. And she went through all the reasons why that it irritates going down the throat. I said, that's why you lubricate the tube. That it can cause diarrhea. Well, that's why you treat that. I mean, she had like all these things. And I told my dad, they're absolutely playing on your ignorance. Don't you understand what's happening? And the hospital where my grandmother was staying, they were furious that this was ordered. But my dad had given over to this hospice doctor, and there was nothing the hospital could do, but they were furious, and they said, she's known as the female Jack Kevorkian. Don't you know that? Mm. And I remember when I came in, my grandma was moaning, and she was just like, all balled up, moaning, and she tried to make it sound like this was beautiful, what's happening, and look at this, she's preparing to exit, and my friend told me that this is like dehydration, this is what's happening, and so I gave my grandmother water with a sponge, and she swallowed a whole glass of water with a sponge, and I told my dad, I am not leaving here unless you will give her water. Mm. And she died the next morning. And it was just the most horrible thing ever to watch. In Michigan, we have an attorney general ruling that says, as far as DNRs go, that, and this was actually a liberal attorney general who issued this ruling, but courts cannot issue a DNR, and a guardian cannot issue a DNR unless there's an advance directive specifically saying that they wanted this. They're really good about it in Michigan. That's good.
Well, obviously, I'm not here to judge anybody's actions on how they treat loved ones. And again, we're talking, Terri's case was not dying and was able to assimilate and metabolize food and water. Feeding tubes are quite common today. People, I have a report, I didn't put it up here tonight, I took it off my slideshow, but there's upwards of 1 million people at any given time that have feeding tubes, either for a short period of time or extended period of time, like Terri. Some people just need them temporarily to get over whatever swallowing difficulties they're having, if they have a stroke or whatever the reason might be. And that's why it's so scary, because it is medical treatment. You might not even be able to have the opportunity to give someone a chance to see if they recover, because they can deny it to somebody. But a lot of them are case-by-case basis. But the one thing that seems to me that I have found over the years being in this issue is that, and again, you would know, most people, if they are in a dying process, can still be hydrated. You don't, if they're dying, imminently dying, I don't know, and again, I think if they were rejecting the feeding tube, the doctors would know. And there are situations where they are rejected and it becomes very uncomfortable for them. But absent that, no one's going to, you cannot, it's like with the ventilator. If ventilators keep people alive, none of us would die, because you can just put someone up to a ventilator. Food and water is not going to keep someone alive indefinitely. People, when they're going to die, they're going to die. So, but it's my understanding that we should always at least try, if the person can manage it, to at least hydrate a person until they do pass away. But again, it's case by case basis, and you hope and pray that you have a doctor that understands these issues and has the compassion to treat a loved one in a humane way. So yes, I'm sorry. One more.
Right here.
Oh, I'm sorry.
That's all right. My mother's on a feeding tube right now. My late husband managed his own feeding tube for several months before he died because he was an ambulatory and still intelligent patient. But what I really wanted to precaution people here, because you mentioned the durable power of attorney for health care, that in Alaska, I would not recommend signing that durable power of attorney for health care unless you add some language to it. So I would want to see people referred to either the will to live of the National Right to Life Committee, or perhaps Rita Marker has such a document, but it needs to be a pro-life durable power of attorney, or it could be misinterpreted.
Well, it's exactly why it's the importance of understanding state law, where you live, and how the laws apply to those types of situations. So yes, just one more, Chris.
I guess we'll do one. We're out of time, but one more, and we'll just have a shorter break.
If people contact your organization, do you have contacts in each state that they could get some advice, legal help, or direction on some of the suggestions that were made, or even how to change laws, legal process? Because I actually went to a legislator for a couple situations, and one of the roadblocks that a legislator told me is because of the ethics law that was passed in 2009, the legislators can't even help their constituents anymore. And how can, if you have the networking,
right,
can you give that type of help?
Yeah, we've been pretty successful in getting families the help they need these past. I mean, there's some situations we just not in a position or have the ability to help them. But we try our best. But unfortunately, we would love to get involved in public policy, get some of these state laws changed as they pertain to food and water. We're a very small foundation. It's tough for us. Again, to the reasons I go back, and I think the lack of urgency people see with this issue. So, but we would love to get into public policy at some point, because the laws need these food and water laws. I mean, I think Dan had said it. You think the abortion lobby is bad. I testified in Louisiana on a food and water, I think it was Louisiana, they were trying to get food and water, if I remember correctly, it was several years ago, back to ordinary care. And they came out of the woodwork. I mean, they saw this as a threat to being able to systematically end these people's lives, cost savings, whatever the reasons behind it. It's always money. I mean, I should probably mention that in the beginning. But these people came out of the woodworks to try and make sure that this bill did not make any progress on ever getting passed, and it was defeated because of the people that just came out and testified against us. And I think you would see that throughout the nation if you try to. And again, I think that's really one of the keys in this issue. One of the things, if we could change the law, is to look at food and water as being ordinary care again, at least on a state-by-state issue or state-by-state basis. I think it will go a long way. It wouldn't stop it, but it'll go a long way to making it much more difficult to end these individuals' lives. So with that, well, again, thank you all very much. I appreciate it. God bless you.